second. So I decided to do the topic of police violence within the autistic community because I believe it is something that is often overlooked, but with the proper information, it is easy and quick to educate people on this matter.
So as Molly mentioned, I wanted to focus on the LGBTQIA plus community because, like the autistic community, most of the time the police violence and discrimination that happens within it is also overlooked. When I was doing my research, I found so many stories from young individuals like ourselves, and then older individuals as well, who have faced so much discrimination from police and the way that police interact with them, that I thought it was very, very important to touch upon this topic in regards to the political climate that we have currently going on in this world. And again, we later decided with the help of Dr. Watson that we should combine our topics as they both focus on both underrepresented groups. And to both of us, that was a very, very great idea.
So once we decided on our topic, our next step was kind of how are we going to present all of our research. So we thought of going with like a PowerPoint or a research paper at first, but then we decided we wanted something like a little more creative, maybe something that would make it more enjoyable to educate people on such a heavy topic. So that's when Jorge brought up the idea to do a speed drawing type of video.
Yes, so like Molly mentioned, I brought up the idea of presenting our research in the form of a speed drawing video. And the way I came about the topic is I watched a video where Billy Porter outlined all the political activism within the LGBTQIA community. And I found it so informative and very, very, very enjoyable to learn about the topics and political activism within that community that I honestly learned way more than I already knew about. So from there, we started to brainstorm about what goes into that video, because when we see them, we're like, oh, easy peasy. You just draw, speed it up, and there we go. But to our surprise, it wasn't that difficult. Like I said, it was just, it just took a little inserting of our videos here, a little editing of the sound, and then a little touch of music, and bam, we ended up with our final project, which we will be presenting in a little bit.
So once we completed our project, we were really happy with how it turned out. So we are going to share that with you now. The name of our research presentation is Police Violence and Discrimination within the LGBTQIA and Autistic Community, and we hope that you enjoy it.
Awesome. So I will be sharing that. The video is about 7 minutes long, and 7 minutes long, which that video outlines the two separate communities, and then at the end we will come together, both Molly and I, to describe how they fit in together. Okay, let me make sure and
Did you know 1 in 5 young adults with autism will interact with a police officer before the age of 21, and that they are 5 times more likely to have an encounter with a police officer than someone without a disability? Police are not always trained on how to interact with autistic people, which can make things difficult because people with autism can oftentimes be panicked by sirens or lights, or may not be able to cooperate with the police officers. The sense of panic and lack of training has led to many serious and/or deadly encounters. In 2015, for example, New York police officers beat and injured Troy Canals. Troy was an African-American autistic teen who was sitting outside his home when the police approached him and questioned him about what he was doing, and then punched him for no reason. In 2017, Lindsay Bechet Torres called for an ambulance when her autistic son was having a meltdown after he did not take his medication. Then 2 Worcester, Massachusetts officers arrived and knelt on the 10-year-old's body as they handcuffed him after all he did was throw a small package of chips. In 2018, a school resource officer in Statesville, North Carolina, handcuffed, restrained, and taunted a 7-year-old autistic boy. The boy was agitated after switching to a new medication. The mother filed a lawsuit because she, rightfully so, felt it was ridiculous to attack a 7-year-old special needs boy. In 2019, police in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, shot and killed Kobe Heisler after they were called to a domestic assault involving a weapon. When Kobe approached the officers with a knife, they fatally shot him. Sadly, Kobe was only 21 years old. If police had better training, could instances such as these have been prevented? The push for better training in the police academies needs to continue.
Police officers are charged with protecting and serving the public. Yes, this includes everyone, but it seems that those who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, etc. have often been given good reason to whether or not the same responsibility of protecting and serving applies to them. We all know that both the LGBTQ community and police have not been seeing eye to eye lately, like many minority groups with the United States. The LGBTQIA community has been fighting the fight against police brutality in regards to their own. Let's go back to June 28, 1969, to the Stonewall Inn. This is where the fight for equality began for the LGBTQIA community. The Stonewall riots of June 28, 1969, in the state of New York is one of the most historic movements that has both the LGBTQIA community and our men in blue right at the center of it. This moment was a way to fight against police violence and oppression against the LGBTQIA community. This historic day was heard all over the world. Although this was a historic day, it would not go on without a fight. Since the events of the Stonewall Inn occurred, the number of individuals who identify as part of the LGBTQIA community have been discriminated against. In the United States, there has been a mistreatment by law enforcement including, but not limited to, profiling, entrapment, discrimination, and harassment by officers, and more. In 2014, a survey released found that 73% of respondents had face-to-face contact with the police in the past 5 years. Out of the 73%, 21% of those individuals reported encountering hostile attitudes from officers. 12% reported verbal assaults by officers. 3% reported sexual harassment. 2% reported physical assault. All the described incidents were reported at higher frequencies by respondents of color and transgender and gender not conforming individuals. Andrew, Washington, D.C. I was called a derogatory term and beaten up by police officers right here in the nation's capital. Then, charged with assaulting them and forced to plead guilty for being under the influence of my HIV meds. Michael, Menominee, Wisconsin. I was 14 years old when my adoptive sister and I were in a severe car accident. The damage and injuries were extensive. My older sister was asked who our parents were, and she told them the names of our two moms. The officer gave my sister a puzzled look and asked, "Who is your father?" My sister responded with, "We have lesbian parents." The officer without hesitation told her, "We don't recognize that in the state." This incident only added to the horror of the terrible accident we were in. Our moms reported the incident, but nothing was done about it. Natalie, Las Vegas, Nevada. I was arrested and charged with prostitution at a local casino. While the case was subsequently dismissed without going to court, during my arrest, I was physically and verbally assaulted by the arresting officers and others. I was put in handcuffs so tight that my wrists swelled up and turned purple. My face was shoved into a wall while I was handcuffed. The officer threatened, mocked, and demeaned me for being trans. Okay, so that pretty much concludes the presentation that we came up with in regards to put our research in a way that makes it more, I don't really want to use the term easy, but for lack of better words, but easy to take in, because such a heavy topic kind of puts a weight on people and it starts thinking. So we hope you guys enjoyed your presentation. And I know the question that we were being asked several times was, how do these topics fit into each other? And just as in the beginning, we kind of were wondering that ourselves as well. We were like, okay, both topics, different communities, how do they come in together? And as we both continue to do our separate research, we both realized that the same tactics and the same ways that police interact with individuals and many minority groups are present within our own research and the communities that we decided to talk about. Molly, you're muted.
Thank you. So when we talk about the same tactics, what we mean is basically that the way police officers and or individuals with authority interact with people in these communities, it's often the same. So for example, language. Within both of these communities, the language being used isn't the proper terminology. And sometimes when it comes to interacting with people with autism, police officers treat them like any other person, and they may not take into account that they may not feel comfortable or they may be panicked or alarmed.
Yeah, so exactly what Molly said. When it comes to terminology, and language being used by police officers towards those in the autistic community and the LGBTQIA plus community, we tend to hear many derogatory terms that are being called, that are being said. In the story that I mentioned of Andrew, I had to change one of the words because I wasn't sure how everyone would feel about the term, but at the same time, we kind of need to hear the things that are being said in order to react in a certain way and make sure that this doesn't happen again. And but to continue with that, a lot of these derogatory terms in the way that police interact end up causing more harm than good. But as mentioned, in both communities and in many minority communities, like the ones that we mentioned today, the way that police interact with them isn't basically the best or correct way to do it.
So some other tactics include, but aren't limited to, physical interaction, entrapment, hostile attitudes, etc. So all in all, the way that police interact with individuals such as those within the autistic and LGBTQIA plus community needs to change, and that starts with us, either with writing to our congressmen and women to enforce and better develop anti-discrimination laws, request and demand that police officers are better trained in the area of interacting with such individuals, and lastly, by supporting and standing up for what you believe in.
And to continue with that, all this might seem like it's something that we usually do on a daily basis. And as we saw this past summer, if it wasn't for all the individuals who stood up for what happened and called out and spoke out against the wrong that was being done, we wouldn't be in the place we would be in. But I feel like if we continue to do what we are doing, continue to stand up for what we believe in, and when we see something wrong, if we call it out, we will be able to impact and make more change in this world. So with that said, we thank you for your time, and we hope that you enjoyed our presentation on such a heavy topic. I guess now we will all open the floor for any questions any of you guys might have in regards to anything that we didn't cover, and we will do our best to answer the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you. I think, there's some comments in the chat who, being very appreciative of your style of presenting. So I also found it to be very engaging, and I thought to myself, this could be a great opportunity to publicize these speed drawings either on a university YouTube channel or other educational channels. But thank you for that. So I'm going to open the floor for questions, comments. Applause.
I'll hop in here. Hello to you both again. It's so good to see you. One of the things that you talked about at the beginning as you were framing your work, and that we talked about when you were doing your work, was the potential to reach audiences outside of kind of the small community that we were in terms of Douglas debate, but also a broader community who both might be interested, but also just uninformed and might find it interesting and, get activated and wanted to do something. So I guess I wanted to have you think a little bit about with us, how might you share this? I think Dr. Walsh just offered one suggestion, but have you given any thought to what communities or what mechanisms for getting it out beyond a university community you might use?
Well, I think when it comes to spreading the word in regards to the research and the information that we presented today, I think the best way to start, and I'm not sure if everyone agrees, but I think it's starting with the younger generation where they are starting to learn about all the stuff that's going on in American history, right? We've learned so much about, let's say we learned a lot about the Civil War, the Great Depression, the Industrial Revolution, and all this stuff. And a majority of us, if not all of us, kind of still remember everything that's going on. And I feel like if we share this with, like, let's say, middle school and high school students and continue with that, it kind of will leave an impression on them. And in regards to how we would do this right now, especially in the world that we live in with being a virtual world, the best way to do it is either through uploading it to let's say a Facebook page. I'm not sure how many high school or middle school students have Facebook or if they use it or not, but I don't know. I know Instagram has now their Instagram Live, and you're able, or IG Instagram TV, and you're able to upload videos on there. That's the best way. That's a good way to do it. I know a lot of students and young adults use TikTok, and I am one of those individuals, and I just see a lot of people uploading parts of these videos on there. And right now, I'm pretty sure all of you guys can, college friends can attest that a lot of these TikTok videos are going viral, and they spread so many people. They attract so many people, and then you just hear so much of this on the news about, oh, TikTok's doing this, or YouTube, Instagram. So I think when it comes to sharing this information, it's the best way to do it is through that. But to reach a high school or middle school levels, sending it to, let's say, their guidance counselors or wellness teachers in their schools, so they can share this with their students and have a specific, let's say, curriculum or day where they learn about this. Because again, like Molly mentioned, a lot of this goes unmentioned, and not a lot of people know about what's going on within these communities. And it's, again, if we want to make change, we need to learn about it and how the best way to go about it is. So I spoke a lot. I'll pass it over to Molly if she wants to add anything.
You mainly covered what I was going to say. The only thing I was going to add, I know Dr. Watson talked to us a little bit about like databases that they have that are out there. And I think maybe uploading it to a few of those would also help spread the word. So I definitely think reaching to like middle schools, high schools, college Facebook page, like you said, and then, or YouTube page or whatever, and then maybe some databases. I think those would all be like really good sources to get our information out there.
Wonderful. And I think that you also point to an innovative way to present research in the, post-COVID, right, when we are presenting our research. So I really, really appreciate that in your presentation, along with the research that goes with it. If you look at the chat, there's some more comments. I don't know if anybody who put a comment in the chat wants to comment, or we can just leave them there. Anybody else with a question or a comment for Jorge or Molly before we move on? Okay, thank you again. We have our reactions down below. Those are fun. Keep it supportive and cheering all of us on. So next up is we have the Frederick Douglass Research Academy group, and they will be talking about media representation analysis of Tamir Rice. So I'm going to turn it over to them.
Yeah, so we did, we looked at the media representation analysis of the Tamir Rice case, and we looked at two media outlets that were the New York Times and the Atlantic, and we wanted to see how they framed the Tamir Rice case and find out a little bit more about the overview of the facts and basically how the media has presented the information and of the after effects of the case. So actually, when we looked at the articles, I think the way that we found the articles was we searched through the databases of the media outlets to find Tamir Rice's name. And actually, whenever we were looking through the articles that contained his name, we actually found out that there was not a lot of information about him or about the case. And we were saddened by this because it seemed like his name was only listed in there among many other names of tragedies that have happened within the African American community by police officers. So we are going to explain how we did our research by rating each article. And Estefani is going to explain a little bit more about that.
Okay, so since we had all these articles, we of course needed like a rating system, and the categories that the rating system had were clarity, engagement, depth, uniqueness, and centrality. And also we had to rate the articles. We have to give them a score, and that was from numbers 1 to 5, 1 being the worst and 5 being the best one that had like the most information. And then also we had charts of data. I think Leslie is going to show them in just a little bit. And within only 1% of the articles being labeled as ones, and depth and engagement had even distributions, which the majority of articles were 3s and 4s.
Can you guys see that? Is it showing up? Okay.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so whenever we did our research and we found all these, it was very interesting for us to look at because, you know, when we had picked who we had wanted to do our presentation on, and we picked Tamir Rice's case because it's such a unique case in the sense that he was so young and it happened so early on in the BLM movement that it's something that everybody knows of because it's this like quote unquote the start in the BLM case, but he's not mentioned as much. He's kind of pushed to the background. He's in everybody's back pocket, and they will bring him up, you know, occasionally to be like, oh, this happened to him and he was so young and we can't let this happen again. But then as soon as they get their point across, he is essentially forgotten about, at least in the articles that we talked about. Most of the articles, whenever they said his name, all they said was Tamir Rice, 12-year-old boy, shot by police within 2 seconds of them arriving. And they didn't go into depth about like what he was doing or, you know, like the police officers, like what happened to them afterwards and how, you know, they the trial wasn't fair and that, you know, things like that. So it was extremely nerve-wracking for us because we wanted to find articles that genuinely talked about him and what happened to him and the aftermath of what happened to him and what happened to the police officers that killed him. And it was so difficult for us to actually find these articles, even though whenever you search Tamir Rice's name, that's like, those are the articles that come up. Most of them, the first ones that come up, just use his name as like a passing sentence. And they just lump him in with the endless categories or the endless names of other individuals who were tragically killed by police. So whenever we picked the certain like ratings for it, we did like uniqueness to the article, and we found that only 5% of articles that we rated a 5 went into depth about his case. And, you know, after looking at all these articles, we realized that the ratings indicate that, you know, the articles had a good amount of clarity and they were engaging to us. However, none of them really went into depth about his case and what had happened to him and the aftermath of it.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about like the findings that me and Jordan are going to talk about the findings that we saw when we were doing this research. Jordan just mentioned just a little bit of it about the first finding that I will talk about. And that is that Tamir Rice's case was always reported very simplistically. And the majority of the articles, they only mention his name, age, and the police officer who killed him. And also the fact that he was playing with a toy gun. And we also found few articles that actually gave more depth into his case, that gave more information that was very useful. But these articles were very uncommon, and they gave very significant alternatives to his case. Tamir's case has not been only an event where lack of depth is reported. In an event involving unarmed African American killed by a police officer. And also in the first few days, we also noticed that most articles focus on the event's broader narrative by only giving the basics of the event and updates case as they unfold in the justice system. And now Jordan is going to talk about our second finding.
So another finding that our research team had observed was that whenever articles report killings by police brutality, and they title it like young child tragically killed by police, it obscures a more transparent narrative around the culpability for the police that were involved. In fact, the articles rarely ever mention the police officers' names that killed them. We would occasionally, we found a good chunk of articles that mentioned the name of the police officer, but in regards to Tamir Rice, because a lot of the articles that we looked at too were mainly just about other individuals who had been killed by police and was a reference back to the Tamir Rice case. But it was hard for us to find a significant amount of articles that, you know, really mentioned his name or the second officer's name that was there. Second officer's name that was there was hardly ever mentioned, if at all. So, you know, by analyzing those articles that mentioned the officers, it became a rejoinder that the officers were like, oh, they're being sent on paid leave. They made bail. They're waiting to see if they're going to trial or not. You know, they're not found guilty in the criminal act, and et cetera, like things like that. So that to us further proved that obscuring culpability for the officers that were involved was very, very evident and very, you know, like broad. And so it kind of showed us that, you know, in the public eye, the officers are rarely ever going to face consequences for their actions, because whenever an article like just comes out about a shooting, that can mainly tell you, you know, like how it's essentially going to go down is the way that the article mentions the officer and how, you know, like the things that are going along with them. And then Leslie's going to close this out.
So our research aligns with this prevalent theme of dismissing the concerns of the victims and even the victims themselves, and how our culture, in our culture, like the blame is always on the victim, and rarely do they show the person responsible for the tragedy. In this case, the police, especially in cases where African Americans are involved. And so through our investigations, more questions popped up than answers. And one question for me was, why is this? Like, why is the media focused on obscuring the responsibility of the police? Why are they listing Tamir Rice along with many other people that have been killed by police brutality? Like, why list, and why is there an obscurity of the people and their cases whenever these cases are really important for the community and for understanding the plights of African Americans? And Estefani or Jordan, do you have anything more to say about other questions that have come up with your findings?
My only questions mainly were the same as yours, you know, as we've discussed that in our program, but I also wanted to mention and kind of, you know, further explain your point where you were talking about why their names were just listed. And that was a big, heavy question for me because, you know, as a biracial woman living in America, it made me think like, you know, if this were to happen to me or somebody in my family, would we given a year or two? Because there were some names in those articles that we had looked at that I was like, I remember hearing about this just, you know, last year, like it was very recent. So why is their case just a passing thing? Why is their name just thrown out there? And why is it not given the depth that it deserves? Like their name, you know, needs to be remembered and everybody needs to remember what happened. So why are we just lumping them into this category of just individuals who were killed by police officers? You know, we're kind of losing count as that goes on. So that really bothered me because I was like, if this happens to somebody in my family, I know how I would feel if I read an article a year later and, you know, their name was just in a list, their name and their age. That's all that they were, you know, drawn down to. And it wasn't like, oh, you know, mother of 3 or, you know, caregiver for their father, you know, like the things about them. It was just like they were shot and that was it. So I just doing this project kind of it answered a lot of like self questions that I didn't want to really get into before, but I'm glad that I did because it makes me think more so about like everything that is going on in the world right now, especially with the BLM movement. And so there were a lot of questions that, you know, came up like personally, but by doing this project, it kind of answered them in a way or in a sense that I didn't know that I needed before. So
Going on what Jordan and Leslie said, I had the same questions. I remember that even before doing this research, I can't remember in which class we were talking about how always the media gives like this attention to the ones that they do this act, such act of shootings or killing of individuals. So it's very sad that the media only focuses on that. And by doing this research, it gave me like more evidence that this is true. I was very sad to find out in one of the articles that like Jordan said, I have heard of this case, but I remember not learning that actually his sister was like in that same park, but she was playing somewhere else in that park. And when this little boy came up to her saying, oh, a boy shot another boy or something like that, the little boy said, she ran to see if something happened to his brother. And instead of the police officers giving her the chance to be with her brother, they tackle her. And I can't just imagine. I have a sister that is 13. I can't just imagine her going through the same thing. And it's just very sad.
So thank you guys for, oh, sorry. I was just trying to thank everybody for, listening to us and letting us present.
I'm just going to say thank you all for sharing your research with us. And now we can open it up for any questions or comments for the research team.
I have a question. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to know, how do you even go about like being involved in something like this? Because I'm a junior at IEP and I've never really heard anything. Well, I'm also a transfer student. I transferred from Robert Morris, but I just wanted to know how you go about like getting into these type of programs, or how that works.
Do you want to take this?
Who, me? Oh.
I mean, I can. It doesn't matter to me.
Well, I don't know, Jordan, I don't know how you did it, but I'm in the Promising Scholars program, and that's how we went through it, because we had to choose like which group we had to go into. So there's like the Research Academy and there's like another debate team. But I think you can contact Dr. Vaccaro. I don't know if he is in charge of the Research Academy every year, but he can probably give you information about how to join, because anybody can join the Research Academy and learn how to do research and be able to present it in an academic way.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll also kind of hop in there and offer, I just dropped into the chat the link to the Frederick Douglass Institute Collaborative, which the Research Academy contributes to, along with the Debate Society, is also part of the Collaborative's initiatives. And so you can kind of keep up with what we're doing there. And we usually post any new opportunities that we have that way, as well as advertising them at our various universities. So offer that up.
Thank you for that important question. Are there any other questions or comments?
I do have one. I feel like I'm always in there, like I'm good for questions. That's my role, I think. So once again, thank you so much for the presentation. And there was so much. I had like 3 or 4 questions. I will not pepper you with them all, but I am really interested in this emotional content, right? That you all are signaling that it was difficult for you to work through it. You wanted something from the coverage that you were not seeing. I'm feeling, when Jordan talks about the process of reflecting on her own identity and her place in the world through this work, and maybe others in your team. I know there were more of you participating in this in some ways. And so I wonder if you could just talk a little about how you deal with the emotional side of really difficult research like this. I mean, people who are researching violence or the Holocaust or Native American removal in this country and others, and Aboriginal rights. I mean, we all kind of have these moments where we kind of come face to face with the ugliness of humanity. And in some ways you're doing that. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more about how you deal with that emotional side of the work.
So for me, because we started this program in the fall semester. So whenever we had started it and we had first, started reading the articles, it was extremely difficult for me. I found myself to be angry and very upset and, you know, some of the times I couldn't read certain articles, or like I was trying to like watch some videos too to kind of, you know, get more into it, and I just couldn't, and I had avoided it for a little bit. And then I, you know, as we kept meeting at our meeting times and we kept talking about them, I kind of had to sit back and reflect on myself and be like, this is something that has to be done. It's not something that I wanted to do at the time, because I just, you know, I was like, there's already so much going on right now. And, you know, like the process of everything that happened over the summer was still very fresh. And so I was feeling a lot of pain and hurt. And so I kind of had to, like, over the winter break, sit myself down and like force myself to finish the articles, finish the videos, watch and learn, and remember that it's not something that I can change. Because I felt guilty too, because I was like, why are they reporting it this way? Like I know this case, but I feel like I don't really know this case, because every time he was mentioned in an article, it was like the tip of the iceberg, and that was it. And I was like, I know there's so much more depth to this case. So I kind of had to like push my emotions aside a little bit. And obviously, like I kept them in the foreground for the most part, but I didn't let myself get angry. And I started to accept that this is how it was and how it was going to be. So I kind of just had to like, me personally, I had to do a lot of self-reflection and just like a lot of like emotional management of like where to portray the anger. I shouldn't be angry, really. If anything, I should be like pouring my anger into like my survey, like my answers, like, you know, to get like a really good like in-depth analysis of it.
For me, it was kind of the experience as Jordan. I was having a very difficult time just reading articles after article after article. And for me, I had like a different way to just get out what I felt in that moment. And I feel like very bad for my mom, because she was like actually the one being there for me. I would tell her, oh, I read this in this article, and it mentioned this and it mentioned that, and she like really helped me on just like listening. So I guess just like if individuals are going to do a research that is similar to this one, just have like a support system around them, just to listen to them. They don't have to say anything, just listening. And that actually really helped. Also, something that helped was that we had to do a survey for each article, like we mentioned, and we had to write like 2 to 3 sentences and things like that. And like Jordan said, I took it out right there of how I felt and things like that. And it made me see that sometimes you have to actually like research more in depth, and not just I don't have the word, but not just believe what you just hear, but just do your own research in some way. So that really helped me. My mom, I think that was my support system right there.
When I think about research, I think about these emotions are not separate from the topic, right? They're a part of the topic. And this is even with the student that I was working with, these similar themes came up. And it's really, and Dr. Watson, I don't know if you have any insight of the young scholars who have been working on these projects, if there's been any documentation of just emotions for the projects, but
there has been, Dr. Walsh, which is one of the reasons why I was so interested that you all were willing to share that, because I've been to all the panels so far and no one has mentioned it until a question gets asked. So I was excited to hear that you were present enough with your emotions that you could feel it and name it and see that it was impacting the research, but also finding ways to move to it and through it, which is so important for our survival, right?
I too was just so happy to hear that you talking about that as part of the process of how valuable that is for everybody to hear. So thank you for that. Any other questions or comments? Well, Nedrick, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Great presentation. I'm excited about being here. So I'm going to screen share first. So the title of my presentation is Black Lives Matter is Triggering America. So I would like to start off by saying that Black Lives Matters is working to debunk the myth of imperial capitalistic white patriarchal supremacy as defined by Bell Hooks, a term that she coined in the early 90s, and as well as to redesign the ways in which media outlets respond to police brutality in targeted communities. I like to argue that Black Lives Matters is more than a social media hashtag, but a triggering form of activism that triggers us to go out and promote social change. Alicia Garnez, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tomini founded Black Lives Matters not to become celebrities. They oftentimes say this in a lot of their interviews, but they formed this out of a need not to react to the violence, but to offer a way of responding. And this movement has, what started in a local area, has spread globally, according to a Vox article. I'll place some links at the end of this, and I hope I can share those with you on the Douglas page as well. And so this movement has gained global attention. The article says Black Lives Matters has become a global cry rattling against racism and police brutality. The killing of George Floyd has sparked a worldwide reckoning. And so another thing that I would like to do is to talk about Black Lives Matters as not just being owned by a specific group of people, but they don't lead every march. It's a social justice movement where if you feel the need, you go out, you create your movement, you apply the hashtag. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes it receives coverage, sometimes it doesn't. But what's unique about this movement is that it embodies both ideologies from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as well as Malcolm X movement. Some of the activists do. Not necessarily promoted by the entity itself in their literature, but we can see it in the ways in which they protest against social injustices. A lot of them refer to the rioting or to the looting, but it's a way that these activists choose to exercise their voice in protest. Not all do, not everyone's alike. And so that's what's unique about this movement, is that it is a collective group of activists from all walks of life. And so I say that Black Lives Matters is a triggering type of movement because when Black folks are triggered or reminded of the past trauma, that they respond with tenacity. And after hearing about the killing of George Floyd, a 14-year-old young man by the name of Kedron Byron created a song. And so I don't know if it'll play, but the title of the song is I Just Want to Live. And it resounds the things from The Mask by Dr. Maya Angelou, where it says that they laughed to keep from crying. They shuffled through their dreams. They stepped and felt a country and wrote the blues and screams. And so a lot of times before Black Lives Matter, African Americans, Blacks have responded with art. And so we get the Negro spirituals that were called for freedoms. We get the blues that call for love. But now we get hymns of desperation simply calling to live, calling to have an equal life, equity and equality. And so a need for Black Lives Matters. Moving on forward, I would like to define some of the terms in my title. Black, I would like to use the voice of W. Du Bois that says, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideas in one dark body whose strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. And that was the earlier term for Black. And so what this particular group has done is they have took a couple of steps back and said, okay, at the term African American, not everyone embraces. We're going to move back to this Black Lives Matters idea. And so Reverend Jackson was the first one who came up with the term for the descendants of African American slaves. Said that the term African American gave the descent to cultural integrity and placed us in our proper historical context. However, people don't necessarily identify that, and I think sometimes that Black Lives Matter receives a negative effect because it is called Black, and Black is known for negative, for the otherness, according to the system of binary oppositions that we have here in America. Nevertheless, Toni Morrison said that in this country, American means white. Everybody else has to hyphenate. And so I think that that's why the term Black is applied to this movement. I know we do hear all lives matters. We have to say their name, say her name. But this particular movement chose to use Black Lives Matters because Black people, after praying for integration, understanding being separate but equal, had to fight Jim Crow in order to plead for their civil rights, leaving their children and their children's children to wonder if civil rights was the same as American rights. For people like Billie Holiday, who died chained to her hospital bed after announcing that America's trees grew strange fruit. Or Dr. Martin Luther King, who was shot in the head and named the most dangerous man in America for simply leading peaceful protests. Thus, the founders and co-founders of this movement wanted to use their histories to rediscover the essence of being Black, and to recognize that Blackness does not simply want a proper historical context, but it would like a history that would not repeat itself with the death of its youth. You see Emmett Till in 1955 became our Michael X in 1965, who became our Trayvon Martin of 2012, who shockingly reemerged as our Sandra Bland in 2015 and our Breonna Taylor in 2020. And this list seems like it will go on forever, but we hope that this won't. So we have this outlet of recording and using social media as a platform and calling attention to the hardships that marginalized communities face. Black Lives Matters in this way is an ideological and political intervention in the world where Black lives are systematically and intentionally targeted for demise. It is an affirmation of Black folks' humanity, our contributions to society, and our resilience in the face of opposition. In sum, I simply define the movement as an unwanted response inspired by three Black feminists promoted by marginalized folks who have grown tired of seeing Black broken bodies bound to barbaric brutality. Now to define the term American, the Smithsonian in their web portal talking about race said that understanding the core race is the core understanding in America. Whiteness and the normalization of the white racial identity throughout American history has created a culture in America where non-white people are seen as inferior or abnormal. Black Lives Matters is triggering America, one, because it unapologetically affirms Black people's struggle to be seen as fully American. It uses intersectional approaches that interrupt the hysterical narrative that whiteness is better than Blackness. It is a community of like-minded scholars that is assembled together by hope and not hatred, and are assembled from all walks of life. More than recently, there became articles talking about the overwhelming presence of white youth and other marginalized groups within the Black Lives Matters movement. Dr. King stated that at the heart of civilization is what has developed this community, the closest answer to a desperate need for survival from the beast of prey and the danger of the jungle. Man could not survive without the impulse of what makes him a societal creature. Black Lives Matter is a community of social justice advocates who know well that police brutality cannot be stopped without rallying for a re-examination of American history, politics, and the media representation of Blackness and other people who are forced to live on the margins of American society. Eldridge Cleaver in Souls on Ice contends that police brutality is only one facet of the crystal of terror and oppression. Behind police brutality, there is social brutality, economic brutality, and political brutality. Because the history of policing in the United States, many minorities are afraid to call on those who are responsible to protect and to serve their communities. In complaining while Black, an article on racial disparities and the adjudication of complaints against the police, the researcher concludes that The history of policing is rooted in the enforcement of racial order, beginning with slave patrols. Following slavery, law enforcement continued to maintain the color line by enforcing racial separation. So despite the overwhelming presence of police, their excessive force and qualified immunity, the advocates of Black Lives Matters still continue to communicate together and form a community of activists who continue to press forward in their demands for ethical justice while looking behind them at the untimely deaths of minorities with who had hopes for change. Oftentimes, I'm horrified by the images that I see on TV of the looting, of the direct hostility reinverted towards law enforcement officers. But more specifically, I am tired of this never-ending thirst for equity and equality. Nevertheless, I think to myself these words that if governments are instituted among men, deriving their just cause from the consent of the government, it is the right of the people to alter and abolish. It is if government instituted among men that whenever any form of government becomes destructive in its ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. In some, Black Lives Matters is triggering America because it rests on the shoulders, backs, and graves of those who were courageous enough to dream beyond their current realities, only to have their rights as American citizens violated and their lives deconstructed and or destroyed. It is triggering some Americans to reimagine the ways in which they construct their worldviews. Yet it is triggering some Americans to continue up with the status quo, seeing it as just another Black riot. In conclusion, many scholars of Black antiquity have prophesied that our social cries for liberty, just justice, and equality for all will not go unheard. Dr. Martin Luther King resounds that America must see that riots do not develop out of thin air. Certain conditions continue to exist in our society, which must be condemned as vigorously as we condemn those riots. Dr. Cornel West goes on to say that while Black people never have simply been victims, wallowing in self-pity and begging for white giveaways, they have been and are victims. Therefore, to call on Black people to be the agents only makes sense if we examine the dynamics of their victimization. I'm a strong believer in nonviolence, but Sir Isaac Newton prophesied for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. However, to conclude, Malcolm X stated that if America has the right to draft us, to teach us how to be valid in her defense, that is the right of you and me to do whatever is necessary to defend our own people right here in this country. Therefore, we must find ways to promote social justice through nonviolent activity, as well as to understand that if America is at odds with itself, that we are the ones responsible for healing it. Also, I would like to say that it is an important topic because I hope that movement in some form has triggered us to speak up and speak out against the continual othering of those who sing, I too am America. Thank you.
Well, Kendrick works to, oh, there we go, Nedrick, there we go, Nedrick, okay. Veronica, you put in the chat at the same time I was about, that line just grabbed me so much, the rest on the shoulders, backs, and graves, just a very, very powerful line of your presentation. I want to open it up. We have, fortunately, we still have some time left for if you have questions and comments for Nedrick.
Nedrick. Hello. I feel like I have to do disclaimers. Like I know Nedrick. So really, really powerful presentation. Thank you so much. As I was thinking about what you were laying out for us, you went through your key terms, right? And the one that I was waiting for you to talk about, I think I must have missed. What is triggering for you? Like, okay, so you talked about Black,
So triggering is a term that psychologists often use to describe incidents of trauma. When one receives a certain trauma, they are triggered by incidents. However, in triggering activism, certain incidents, when it's continually reported through media, when we constantly see um, people killed on live stream or killed by policing, when we constantly see the riots in any level, whether it just be peaceful protest or looting, it should cause us to trigger us to think about the ways in which people are marginalized, certain groups are oppressed. It's also trigger us to think about the ways in which that we can become advocates for change within the United States.
Mhm.
It comes from a term in psychology, but it's been placed on activism. So one writer says that silence is sometimes the only sane response to traumatic experiences. Maya Angelou said that when she had to testify against the person who raped her, she became silent, but yet she was triggered to become one of the greatest poets we've ever read.
Yeah, it's making me think a lot about what triggering America means, right? Which I thought was so provocative in your title, and suggests some other ways of thinking about how that this moment is engaging us, right? That America is being triggered, and what does that look like, and what is that bringing about in our cultural conversations and our levels of awareness and our willingness to be on the street or to engage in these topics. And so that it's a very arresting term being used like this, and it's making me think quite a bit about where we are right now and why this conversation is happening in the ways that it is right now. So thank you for that. I appreciate
Yes,
that.
ma'am. I mean, when we look at the coverage of the trial that's going on, and we see people who agree with the verdict, who don't agree with the verdict. When we think about the incident with Rodney King, people who agreed with the verdict, who didn't agree with the verdict, it sends a sign that America in some way is unhappy. And if she is unhappy, then it's up to America to make her whole again.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm so in love with James Baldwin. James Baldwin stated that because I love America, so I should be able to criticize her perpetually. And I think that sometimes that we have this overwhelming sense of patriotism that we are reluctant to look at America for the very fabric that she is. I mean, the sum total of her history.
I thought that the quote from Malcolm X that you included was really good. Like that, how Black Americans are taught how to implement America's agenda around the world. So why shouldn't Black Americans be allowed to implement it at home? Yeah.
And I was a little worried about that because I didn't want to say that I'm promoting violence in any way. I think that it's very disheartening that we see what's going on on the TV with the looting and things. But I'm very disheartened that her child has been stolen from her through police brutality. I'm very hurt that Sandra Bland was stolen from Prairie View before she can even accept the position. And so I think that it also makes me think about a line from a poem that says, I understand their meaning, how and when it did arise from living on the edge of death. They're keeping us alive, and someone has to do something.
I want to thank all of our presenters today. These very powerful conversations. Thank you to all of you. And I hope that this is just the beginning of these conversations that we start here. For any of the presenters who feel comfortable doing so and would want to put their contact information into the chat, you may choose to do that as long as that's something you're comfortable with, if others want to continue these conversations. The other thing I'm going to put in the chat is if you are here for if I'm going to put the extra credit voucher into the chat, as well as the events survey link. So if you could please complete that, it doesn't take much of your time at all. Let's see, this should work. There we go. So the one is the extra credit voucher, the other being the survey link.
And yes, presenters, please also participate in the survey. There's a section there that's specifically for you. So please do that.
And I want to remind everybody that tomorrow there's another panel at noon. There are the debates on the 23rd. Dr. Watson, correct me if I'm wrong. And the community healing space at 1 p.m. on the 23rd for everybody.
Oh, if I could just do a little plug for that community healing space, especially since we did have the opportunity to really think about emotions. That is a space where we're going to have a couple of folks of color, queer folks who are there to help us process emotional content here and to create a space for some reflection, some community building and connection, and some healing. So I really do encourage us all to participate if you can. We would love to see you there sharing your thoughts and reflections.
Thank you so much, Dr. Watson, for these opportunities.
I have one more question.
Go ahead.
Is there anywhere that I could find the link to this presentation or something like that? I tried to save it on Facebook through the stream, but it didn't really work. But
we will be posting these afterward, Infinity. So thank you for asking that. So they will be on the Douglas Collaborative website and available. And actually, I think it's also on YouTube already, or at least it will be very shortly. So they will be there. Thank you for asking.
Okay, thank you.
Is that the correct link, Dr. Watson, that I just put up there in the chat?
It is not, because we're going to have a
okay.
different one. We're going to have a different page for that. So, but if you go to the website, you'll be able to find it as soon as we get those posted.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, everybody. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Take care.